So this is me. This is my garden a year and a half ago now, and going from March to July. And of these two pictures, and this and the next one, is the progression through a season is rapid and changing all the time. So we're starting early propagation from mid-February, planting out from mid-March. You can see even by 26th of March on the left, the garden more than 3/4 planted up. And then by July, it's, if anything, emptier, but that's the transition phase to second cropping, which is, oh, if I can work out how to get this to go forward. Hang on a minute. Sorry about this. Why is that not working?
Should be able to press your down button on your laptop.
I quite agree. Yeah, I was doing right click there. Okay, I've worked this out. So yeah, if I just go back briefly and you look at July on the right, and then now you go forwards, that's 3 months difference on the left. So that's the almost everything in the September photograph is the second crop. I'm in quite a favorable location here. Pete Richardson knows it as well, having slogged away one May, picking leaves with me. It's low-lying, 70 feet above sea level, and southwest Somerset, a bit milder than you are on Dartmoor, long season, but we're in a frost hollow as well. So we've had a couple of nights of -6 centigrade recently. And then I'm harvesting all year round, or aiming to harvest all year round, but not much in the winter, obviously. So a lot goes into the store. I'm selling a lot locally, salad bags. This was January last year, and pretty much the same now. So there's still a lot of green, but at this time of year, it's not so much for selling, it's mostly for home use and also for courses. I mean, of course, that one I've lost now. I used to grow a lot of food for day courses here. So I still got quite a bit of vegetables in store, but the main output of the garden is in the summer months. And then it is also, the garden's about informing my writing and learning more myself all the time and sharing that knowledge with thousands, if not millions, of other people. And on the left, you can see the time of year, the hungry gap, which people are getting more aware of now. Supermarkets have rather robbed us of the threat of hungry gap, because the stuff is always available and looking so fresh. But everything in the crate on the left is good to eat. You can just see how the root vegetables are sprouting, and they've gone a bit limp, but they're still very full of flavor. While at the same time, I'm always really concentrating on getting the early plants going. And that photograph on the right is the middle of April last year, showing what you can do with raising transplants in the greenhouse and then fleecing over without any hardening off. And then this is only 2 months further down the line. 2nd of June last year, we did have an early spring, that's to be sure. The broad beans, for example, they were sown and transplanted December. Salad leaves in the middle, that's my staple output from the garden. That's the one that makes the money. We sold it last year over £20,000 worth of salad leaves from the 1/4 acre. I'm cropping 1/4 acre, 1,000 square meters. You can see from the carrots how well no-dig is working, the lovely long roots, and also how I'm on it with pest prevention from the broccoli. And then this is going to 3 months again further down the line, and the favorite top time of year really for harvest. Everything is available at that time of year. It's so lovely. So no dig. And this is something I've always seen is fungi and not been too aware of them really in terms of what they are and what they do until more recently, and nor is anybody else. You know, it's only in the last few years that awareness of fungal microsystems has come to the fore. Having said that, when I started off gardening in 1982, I did even 1981, I was reading up in the Soil Association, old magazines, and came across articles about Elizabeth Rayner at Wareham Heath in Dorset, who was a biologist working for the Forestry Commission, and she's the one who really discovered mycorrhizal fungi in the modern world, as far as I can see, in 1930s. And she used to talk about them a lot in Soil Association magazines. And then you'd get modern scientists, as in the 1980s, saying, oh, vegetables don't use mycorrhizal fungi, end of story. And that for me sums up what is wrong with scientists. You know, they are taking a snapshot of what they know at the moment and disrespecting even everything else, calling it superstition. And I was sure that vegetables must use mycorrhizal fungi, and I'm even more sure of it now. And I see this kind of thing a lot in my gardens. So as you see on the left there, those fungi that pop up, the fruiting bodies pop up. And on the right, you can see the white colonies in the soil, which we see a lot. And they're beautiful smell. Forest floor often when we're harvesting root vegetables, particularly because otherwise we don't really see very much of what is going on in the soil. That's Burlicum carrots this autumn left, and what was going on just next to them where we'd harvested carrots recently. And that bed now is covered in its mulch of annual compost. Carrots were the second crop after garlic. Weeds were a second planting after what were they after? Lettuce. And again, those fungi really show up there. There are certain corners of the garden and beds which have more, but I'm seeing them more and more. And I think it's partly, if you look at the surface of the bed there, you can see quite a bit of woody fragments. Since 2016, when I bought a shredder, I have been putting more wood into my compost heaps, and this is really paying off. It's obviously finding the balance, say more about that later, but we need wood in the ecosystem of our soil. So that's my annual standard mulching procedure, and I blame myself a bit here for misrepresenting it over the years. I've been a bit careless in specifying how much compost to apply, mainly because I don't want to understate it. I don't want people to put on too little, but I've commonly said 5 centimeters, 2 inches, and actually in the last couple of years I've been going out with a ruler, which I hadn't done before, and actually measuring it, and blow me down, it's more like 1 inch, 3 centimeters, say just over an inch. And of course the height depends whether you measure it with a bit lumpy or whether you press it level, whether it's settled a bit after rain and weather. And I would say 1 inch pretty well covers it. The main point is that you've covered all the soil, so there's compost covering all the surface area, so all the soil is covered. Pathways are covered with about the same amount, around 3 centimeters, maybe 2.5, 1 inch of wood chips. I like them to be old wood chips if I can. That way I figure I've got closer to the decomposition phase where they're more edible by soil microorganisms. And so I've got piles of wood chip around the garden that are slowly decomposing, and they go on the paths once a year only in the autumn. Then I notice from people's questions, like on Instagram, that they assume there's cardboard or membranes under those wood chips because they do not get why there are no weeds in the paths. They must have been battling with weeds like a lot of people are, probably from disturbing the soil or inheriting weedy soil, and they never really got on top of it. So I will explain that more, but I can assure you there's no cardboard. I don't use cardboard ever again after year 1, when it's initially used just to kill existing weeds by smothering, depriving them of light. And then after that, you don't need it anymore. I use a bit in the compost heaps, and I don't use any membranes. I hate membranes. And carpets, also all synthetic carpets, revolting. And I've noticed on here as well from people how they disappear into the soil, archaeological remain, and then people have to pull them out. So this is no dig. As Nikki said, it's all about simplicity, leaning on your spade, and with bread it's the same thing, no need. And I'm sure there are many other professions where you can simplify things in this way and get it down to what really works and what you need to do maximum and no more. This links to a big failing of humanity, that we tend to complicate things, and then we tend to look up to people who complicate them. You know, it's like, oh, scientists is the, well, sorry, I've said them already. You might have noticed. Anyway, I won't say any more on that if I won't. Back to horticulture and looking at starting out. So this is homemakers when I arrived, 2013, well, autumn 2012 on the left. And I was fortunate. I came across homemakers by chance. It had been on the market for 2 years. Nobody wanted it, and I saw the potential. Nobody wanted it because the house was a bit poor, but it's fine. And more than anything, the land is lovely. It's a level site of 3/4 of an acre, and I'm cropping a 1/4 acre. And my first procedure is to cover ground with combinations of cardboard and compost. And what you can see on the left there is well-rotted cow manure, about 5 tons, which at the time I could buy for £25. So I was not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. And the photograph on the right is 4 years later, and the garden is basically abundant now. But that first year, that first phase, if you're starting no dig with a lot of weeds like this, you've just got to be careful and be thorough in year 1. Now, this slide is odd and I need to change it. It's moving and it shouldn't be. Oh, phew, that's okay then. Sorry, I need to go back there. I've had a hiccup there in previous presentations. So going from that previous picture, that's 6 months later only, where you can see the abundance happening, and that's all without disturbing soil at all. So it's sometimes claimed by people who don't know and should know that they don't know, but don't, that you don't need to disturb before you begin. So even if you're starting on clay, you just leave it alone. There is life in even clay. Well, there's a lot of life in clay, actually. People have been sold a nonsense by manufacturers of machinery that soil has to be loose and fluffy before roots can get in, and that's just totally untrue. So these plants are mostly now, they're rooting into the undisturbed soil, which here is a heavy silt. It's a good soil, but it's pretty dense. And they start life by rooting in the compost, and then they go down, and the cardboard around the edges is still helping to control couch grass, which is trying to creep in. And a lot of the initial mulching work, very importantly, is about paths. Paths is a massively underrated, misunderstood topic, and often ignored where it should be paid a lot of attention to. And one reason I emphasize that is because I'm always looking to move to having beds with no sides, because that's a lot of extra expense, a lot of time, and wooden sides tend to harbor slugs and wood lice and other pests. And generally, I can see situations where they're useful. And like the two beds in the foreground here, I have kept wooden sides until last month, actually. Those two beds had wooden sides for 6 years. I know it was 8 years now. And finally, I took them off. But they're my dig no dig trials, so they were useful for delimiting the trial beds. Anyway, if you don't have wooden sides, you need to have clear paths with no weeds. So year one, I'll do up to 3 applications of cardboard, and then wood chip finally, or sometimes wood chip on triple layer of cardboard. You know, there's many permutations possible. What I want to avoid giving you as a precise recipe, which has to be applied in all situations. It's not like that. You've got to know, once you understand the procedure, you can adapt, and according to the weeds that are present, how much mulching you need to do, according to the materials you have, how thick your cardboard is, etc., etc. And more than anything, you've just got to watch what happens and react. By this stage, life is easy. So this, you know, within the end of my first year, the perennial weeds were all gone, including couch grass. Bindweed took another year. There was quite a bit of bindweed in this garden. There is now none. You can get rid of bindweed. That's another myth that people come out with about how it goes on forever. But they've never tried no dig and thorough mulching. So this is now a garden free of perennial weeds and full of produce. And it means with no dig, you can concentrate on growing. So it's this thing of double cropping as well. In this climate, it's more possible than with you in Chagford, probably. But even so, if you get super organized, particularly about propagation, you've got the same light levels as here. That's another factor in growing that's often overlooked. And this is then second plantings in the same year. And 95% of the beds you can see in these two photographs have been replanted in the summer. That is why we don't have time for weeding. We do whatever weeding is necessary. You can see I'm keeping it very weed free, but we spend too much time weeding because you need all your time for resowing, replanting, and harvesting, and then clearing, and then resowing, replanting, or interplanting. There are many ways to do it. With no dig, you don't have bed prep. That saves so much time. It's just actually such a joyful method. And to give you an idea, looking at there, you can see about 2/3 of my garden. Actually, you can see about half of the total garden if you include the fruit trees and flower borders. And we're spending around 80 hours a week to maintain that. And if you think that's for sales in a year of over £20,000, probably I reckon we're producing £27,000 worth of vegetables here in a year. That from 80 hours, well, okay, it sounds good going, but actually the thing is that 80 hours a week, you think, you know, in modern day terms, that's 2 full-time wages, if you like. 27,000, well, that barely covers it. You know, we're in a real issue of how to make it pay. In my case, in case you wonder, I make it pay by writing, teaching, YouTube. You know, I'm fortunate to have that possibility. So I'm not in the garden as much as I'd like to be now, but I employ more people. But I'm there when I need to be, and there's no manure like the farmer's foot. I don't know if you know that saying. In gardening terms, there's no manure like the gardener's shadow, and it means being out there. There is no replacement for it, and it buys you produce just your sheer presence and spotting things and reacting and learning. So this is a common misconception I notice from people's comments when they look at my garden, especially permaculturists who've been taught that plants must always be growing on soil. There must be no bare soil, is what they've been told again. That statement hides a couple of misunderstandings. One is that soil can be covered with a mulch of compost, as here. So this soil is in fact covered. And the second misunderstanding is that in British winter, for example, it's actually very difficult to have a plant growing all through the winter, particularly when you've been cropping right up to the end of November, even into December. How are you going to get a plant even going in December? Pretty much impossible. Waste of time and money. You know, that's where statements like that are really bad, actually, because they're just stated statement with no qualifying evidence, knowledge that needs to be there when something like that is said. So be careful of bald facts. Always ask for more explanation if you don't get something and why that should be the case. Even in May, you know, you can see there's a few bare beds left. Well, not bare mulched, obviously, although some of them actually have already cropped radish and early spinach. But we're planting fast through the spring, and this was May. On the left there, May the 12th this year, where we had a horrible frost after a very April and early May, and that was a very difficult experience. And yet it was also impressive how plants like those broad beans that you can see, they were pretty much cropping by then. They had little pods on, and I was worried. I'd never seen broad beans with pods on suffer a frost of -2 centigrade. For quite a long time. It was frozen from midnight till 7:30 in the morning, and survived they did. And not only that, but the beans within about 10 days were fantastic. So as long as you grow the right plant in season, you have a chance. But you can also see actually in that photograph on the left of that photograph, there are some they were under a double layer of fleece during the frost, and they did survive, but that was a hairy experience. This year, those two photos don't quite match by date, but you can see the beauty of it as much as anything. And this is, for me, it's a really important part of gardening. I'm farming, you know, in a similar way, but you can do it more with a garden. You've got more hands-on approach. How beautiful you can make your vegetable garden. I've got this far and not mentioned the Victorians, but I'm going to now because I blame them for a lot of our misunderstandings. You know, they saw growing vegetables as a utilitarian business. I'm generalizing here, I acknowledge, and vegetable gardens tended to be well, no, that's not true actually. There were some nice wall gardens, but they weren't seen for the beauty that they can have. And that's something I'm really always looking to emphasize, because I figure that if it's beautiful, for one thing, it's probably working well, and secondly, it draws you out to be there, which means you're there more, which means everything grows well. So this is clearing weed, soil, compost. Is starting out, particularly how you get rid of, you know, what might look a difficult situation to begin. And when I arrived at homemade front garden, for want of a better word, actually I could hardly get in the front door. This was after we'd cleared the brambles. It was very overgrown. And then I do dig out bramble roots. You know, no dig doesn't mean no spade. And I get asked on YouTube, you know, like, how with no dig do you plant an apple tree? Oh, well, I dig a hole. And there you go. So dig out bramble roots, and I pulled out the ivy, and then I mulched, and it looked bare for quite a while. And you just got to go with it and get through that. And then the nice things started to happen. And by the second summer, which is photograph on the right, you can see it was really looking nice. There was still the bindweed there, that hedge bindweed, the one with the white flowers, was growing vigorously. And that needs some attention. So you've just got to, you know, respect weeds that are there for sure and that keep regrowing. This is another question often asked at No Dig. You know, the way people phrase it is, what do I do if my soil is compacted? And the answer is, it's probably not compacted. You know, use of words is really important. There's a lot of words wrongly used, and that leads people down blind alleys of misunderstanding. Believe it or not, this soil you're looking at here is not compacted. It is smeared. And that was the builder's Caterpillar tractor that he'd used to take soil out of that hole on the left where he's building me a conservatory. He'd run over the ground a lot in January, very wet weather. And it was depressing for me because that was front house and I was walking through it most days. I'll just get to the garden. And what am I going to do with that? I just left it. And, actually I dug a little hole with my trowel just to see. And underneath the top smeared surface, there was still nice soil. So look what happened. On the left, I had leveled it off using a sharp spade, knocked the peaks into the hollows, and then raked it as level as best I could, scattered grass seed, spread 1 centimetre, half-inch green waste compost, and waited for the grass to grow, and it did. Growth was not as strong and healthy in the beginning as it has become since the soil was still healing. But healing, in my book, is done better by soil organisms than by man with spade or fork. So if you have what you worry is a hard soil, just leave it. Let the soil organisms do it. Encourage them by feeding on the surface. Here's another one. People say you've got to dig out roots of couch grass or perennial weeds before you start. That is total nonsense. If you ever hear that, just ignore it. And this was the soil in and around my greenhouse area, full of couch grass roots when I arrived. And when the builder was digging the trenches for those brick walls, he came up to me almost with a grin on his face and he said, "Oh, you're going to have fun here." And I looked at him with some trepidation. I thought, okay, well, we'll see what happens. Cardboard, compost on top. And yeah, it worked. I must have pulled 2 blades of couch grass from that greenhouse following my very thorough mulching using thicker cardboard than usual. Packing boxes are very good. And 8 inches, 20 centimetre compost. So there you go. And the thing about cardboard is I put on the right just an edge photo where I was mulching a path and no compost on top. And that point of how weeds look for light. So if you allow too much light anywhere, over perennial weeds in particular, they'll take the chance to find it and use it and then keep growing. So this is about being thorough in that first phase of mulching. Against which here, you can see I am not using any cardboard under the compost on that bed. And there was a reason for this, that I ran out of cardboard. We were doing a big area. When I say we, it was me mostly and whoever I could grab to help. Steph, who was my partner at the time, she was very good at finding cardboard and she turned up with a lot, but she was working full time as well. So she didn't have a lot of time to help. This is when I had a friend, a guy helping for an odd day, and he took the photograph. And it's interesting now looking back on that, there were quite a few weeds grew through that bed, through the compost, and they do. Buttercup, thistles, creeping thistle, and I just kept pulling them and I got disheartened and it felt like that was never going to stop. And then suddenly it did stop. By the end of June, there were no more perennial weeds there. And this is going forwards. I haven't got time to explain all the little details you might be noticing in these photos. You see if you can answer them ask them at the end if you want. But things like you'll see what look like wooden sides to the beds there, and they're temporary. That's laid on the ground, and then I remove those after anything between a month and say 6 months, just depending really when I'm ready. Nearly always I find loads of slugs underneath it. They're just formers. They're holding the compost. So we just go back to that one. Without the temporary wooden side, the compost would spill over onto the cardboard. I wanted to keep cardboard and compost separate, and it makes it easier then to remulch paths with cardboard. And there's one bed in the middle where I hadn't done that, and it was more difficult because you've got a kind of sloping edge. And then going forwards again, a photo on the left, which was 9 months again, where there's no more sides to any of the beds. There's only cardboard around the edge against some couch grass, and then now that is not anymore. So, it's that thing, it just becomes so much easier once you get through that first year. Cardboard does discourage slugs, in case you want, does encourage slugs. So that's why another reason not to use it generally. Here there is no slug habitat. No wooden sides, no cardboard, only compost. That's why I use compost rather than hay or straw. I don't know why, but in the permaculture books, mulch is usually described as undecomposed, hay, straw, whatever it might be. Compost for me is a mulch, and it's in our climate, damp climate, it's the perfect mulch, and you don't need a huge amount of it. I'm using for an area like you can see there, about 4 tons a year to grow huge amounts of food. Double cropping year, I put the compost on only once. To me, that is a very reasonable ecological and economical input, and it's the only input I'm using. I'm not using any fertilizers, I'm not using any other amendments, I don't use any slug pellets. Life is just easy. Compost on, the nutrients don't leach out. I don't think in terms of putting more compost on for heavy feeders and less for light feeders. I don't even think in terms of feeding plants. I am feeding the soil. And this is what the Soil Association was founded upon, and then somehow got forgotten for quite a long time until recently. And in most gardening literature, it's still forgotten as far as I can see. People talk all the time about feeding plants and nutrients, and that is not a good way to think from what I have experienced. And then we have the joy of winter. So this is an interesting one because notice the date. It's very close to the spring equinox. And the beauty of time of year is you have got light. And look at the next picture, 6 hours later. That's the day in it, showing how by March, really by any time in March, the sun is strong and you can do things even if the soil is still cold, the winds are cold. And that's where fleece covers really come in. And I use them a lot for my early plantings to get gardens full early on. Combinations of fleece, overwintered plants like the broad beans there and the broccoli, purple sprouting broccoli, which is actually cropping at the time that photograph was taken. It crops even in frost. It's a brilliant plant. And under the fleece, there are things like newly planted beetroot and lettuce, calabrese onions. Most of my ground is planted up within a week or two of photograph. And fleece is great for keeping off the cold winds, and then we can remove it, usually in early May, but sometimes sooner depending on the weather. So those two photos show the contrast before and after. That was 2018 when we'd had a cold spring and then suddenly it warmed up. And looking more detail at that, 24th of May, and towards the left of this photograph, lovely bed of onions, which you could hardly see. If I just go back, they're under fleece there, and barely visible. And then suddenly, whoosh. And that's the effect of using fleece in the spring. And with no dig, it's so much simpler because you're not battling with weeds at the same time as using covers. And then going forwards, you can just concentrate on the recropping and all of this growth that you see, say by November on the right there, no feeding for the best part of a whole year. Really emphasizing that point about how compost is feeding the soil, which then feeds the plants. We do not need to get involved in that process. We just need to encourage soil life to be enabled to do it for us. And we can concentrate on the plants. They will tell us if there is any problems, but generally speaking, if you're a good no digger, which means just looking after your soil in the most basic way and very simple, you will get great results. This is just a nice example of people in Europe or bigger gardens using similar methods. Krautgard in Luxembourg, there, 3 acres. 3 guys who came on a course here 2015 and took it back to Luxembourg, and they're doing fantastic things. So they run a CSA with, I think, 150 members, and yeah, they're making it pay. And so is this guy, Felix Hoffman. These are both worth following on Instagram, perhaps. Felix worked here spring 2016 as an intern, and everybody doubted that he could do something like this, but he was determined. He went back. His parents doubted him. He held a CSE meeting his December after being here. He could see what was possible with no dig, and he sold all his shares. Much easier in Germany than the UK. You can actually sell them for decent money, and he's now running a profitable market garden. These are guys in Bangalore who sent me these photos, and they set this no dig garden up just by following my YouTube videos, and now they're teaching people in India. So this is, for me, a lovely example of the ripple effect and how teaching people in this way, bypassing all the conventional channels of top-down teaching, reaching out directly to people in their location with the information they need and can adapt. Look at the results. You see this guy, how he's using millet straw rather than wood chips, which he hasn't got. That's the way to do it. Although he did comment on slugs, actually. So we'll see how that one goes. This is a guy on the left in Israel. And he sent me those photos. He was a film producer until last year. And then he got interested in gardening, again, I think, from my videos, and just discovered it went really well. And then he noticed a lot of interest from other people. He's now full-time teaching no dig in Israel. Guy on the right's in, Costa Rica, that's it. But he's in the highlands, 1,600 meters, I think. And that's why it looks a little bit temperate climate like us. So, right, I lost my forward. Oh, I seem to have stuck. Right. Yeah, and there's to home, small garden. And this has been just fantastic tool for helping an understanding of no-dig and how people can crop in smaller spaces. Well, I call it small, 25 square meters actually, as a lot of people point out. It's quite a big space really, but you can grow a lot of food in that. And that's my latest video. If you want to see what it's looking like at the moment, check out on YouTube. And we filmed it on New Year's Day. Luckily, Edward was staying here. He's now back at university. He somehow escaped lockdown and got back. But when he was here, we nipped out in the snow. A lovely video. This is my original garden to give a bit of background and context, and also how you might do no-dig, or how I did no-dig in the 1980s on 8 acres actually, eventually using a lot of straw mulch. That was only because I was being given it by my brother, who was a chemical farmer and had a lot of straw spare, and not organic straw. And yet, interestingly, I was approved by the association. I had the symbol in those days, and I was also using very little compost relative to now. You know, you can do no-dig with less compost, there's no doubt about it, but we did spend more time weeding. There's also no doubt about that. So it swings around about a bit. You know, the amount of compost you use is not written in stone. Again, it's for you to work out. We were supplying supermarkets for a while, 1987, Safeways, remember them? And then problems with them, big issues, and then developed box scheme in the late 80s, and also market stall in Castle, my local town. Put up a second-hand greenhouse, and also experimented. You know, even then I was trying lots of different ways, and believe it or not, that photo on the right I had rotivated, just to see, because I wanted to try this paper mulch that was available at that time. It came from Sweden, recycled cardboard, 1989, I think that is, yeah. And actually, it wasn't brilliant. The cardboard shrunk after you have to be very careful that this is shrunk in the lengthwise sense. It would cut off or bury the transplants, and also you still have the paths to hoe or weed. And yeah, it was all worthwhile, leading to, you know, I've been refining the process all the time and finding what works, what doesn't. I tried a lot of things that don't work. I'm not just saying what works and this is the way. I know very well there's a lot of things that don't work and all about them. One aspect of no-dig that is lovely is how I feel it helps to keep the soil warmer. This is a north-facing slope, my previous garden to here, 1 acre of clay. I've done 2 market gardens on clay. No-dig works really well on clay. Clay's great soil. If you're lucky enough to have clay, I'd say, you know, great. It holds moisture, it holds nutrients, and it's still clay. But the worms and the soil life get busy transforming it into aerated and open clay, still with firm structure. That's why, you know, with no-dig, you can walk on beds, whatever your soil, whether it's clay or not, you're not going to sink in and make a hole. That only happens if you've cultivated. That's an example of so-called advice that's given by people who are ignorant because they haven't tried this case no-dig. You know, they're basing everything they say on soil that has been cultivated, which is all they know. And they know that if they've rotivated, the soil is loose, and therefore if they tread on it, it squashes down. And then they talk about you must use a plank to get on your, you know, for your planting. So we don't need to do any of that with no-dig. It's so simple and straightforward. Look at the soil at the bottom of that hole and how there are so many little round holes there, and that's just all the worms, and one worm very happily and conveniently posed for that photograph to help make the point. This is the soil underneath these mulches, and this is 2009, where I was experimenting with my honing down the cardboard and compost way of killing weeds. Back in the 80s, I used to rotivate as starting point. I'd be different then, and now I can see using cardboard, particularly just for that one-off, works so well. And this area, it's about 1/4 of an acre we did over a period of 3 years. And I also interplanted with apple trees. I still am curious about this. In market gardening, I'm slightly doubtful. You know, trees tend to compete with vegetables. Their roots do take a lot of moisture. Here I was using M26 rootstock, which I feel is a little bit vigorous, and now I would have done it with M9. People talk about using stepovers too, and I've seen that, not tried it myself. And you know, allotment skill, there's something in that, as long as you haven't got badgers coming in, snaffling the apples, that kind of thing, because they're very ground level. But yeah, there's just so many things you can do along these lines, but certainly a espalier format is good. Looking the other way at Lower Farm, this is going up the slope. This isn't a question I get asked a lot. So can you do no-dig on a slope? Well, of course you can. It just depends how steep the slope is. If it's a steep slope, I've seen Dan's garden, I don't know if it's still going, in Devon, so not so far from you. I'm trying to remember the name of the place. Not that far from Totnes either, but he's up in the hills, and his slope is so steep that he got a digger in to terrace it. So that is one way, and it worked really well. But he had terraces to contend with, a lot of weeds. Here it was not a major slope, and I just ran beds up and down. This is another beautiful example of how, with no dig, you've got to rewrite the rulebook. It's so often said that you should run beds or lines across the slope to reduce erosion. Erosion does not happen much with no dig because you haven't loosened the soil, so it stays there. It doesn't drain away or wash away. A little bit of compost can wash away sometimes loose on top, and that's why beds up and down makes more sense than across, because if the compost is going to move with the rain, it's going to run down the bed and not into a path below the bed if you had run them across. So there you are, up and down. And it's kind of simpler too, because you're following the gradient when you're bending over equally onto the bed, not more from the top and less from the bottom. Then this is where drainage, and this is an interesting one, because what's going on in the field above, which is causing all that water, is my brother ploughing. And I didn't really figure it out, but I can see it more clearly now from what I've read about water cultivations impeding drainage. Again, rule book is wrong, and it's how it's often stated that you need to dig, aerate, or dig or cultivate to aerate soil. Well, all you're doing is letting air in temporarily to the top bit, and you're actually causing a capillary zone of barrier where water struggles. It goes through the friable top surface, then it meets soil of different density where it can only run sideways. It takes time to percolate through, and that's what was happening after he ploughed the field above my gran. The water was going through the ploughed soil and then running sideways, downwards, in this case, into my cropped area and down my paths. And every autumn I had this after he ploughed. So you live and learn. And that was the field, through the spring and summer, August, it was fantastic in that this is heavy clay soil. And looking down into my small garden at Lower Farm, also really abundant 10-year-old asparagus on the left. Then I moved from Lower Farm to Homemakers 2000, first year cropping. I put this photo in just to demonstrate some slightly different ways of mulching in the first year. Polythene, plastic mulches, land fabric, landscape fabric. I tried it out and I wouldn't use it again. Well, I tried it. If I was going to put cardboard underneath, it does let some light through. The polythene there, green polythene, was 10 years old already. It was from a polytunnel lambing. But anyway, that's just the first spring only, then no more polythene. Starting out, there's Taunton on the left, a perennial plant. And also asparagus I planted in my first year, it did nothing. And yet by year 3, no dig asparagus. On the right there, year 3, asparagus really likes no dig, but it can take a while to get going. It roots initially in the compost mulch before it really takes off. And we get from the asparagus beds that you can see on the right there, they're 9 meters long. There's 2 beds and they yield around 15 kilos a year of asparagus. It's never going to feed the world, but it's a very welcome harvest during the hungry gap. And it's little and often, which is always a nice thing about any harvest. And the way I look after the ground there is 1 mulch a year, inch of compost a year, but the path between all the growth from the year, which I'm treading on there in late October after we scythe them off and then walk on them, and that becomes like a straw in the middle. Also keeps the weeds, I might imagine, and so there's very little weeding to do there. When I see traditional asparagus, I just see loads of weeds normally, and people having to do a lot of weeding. And if you set it up right from the beginning and thoroughly mulch the perennial weeds, you can have joy like this, and it becomes a very easy plant to maintain with a very welcome crop for 2 months a year. So initial mulches can be anything which deprives light, stops light getting to the weeds. And for the fruit trees on the right, I'm using undecomposed, well, not partially decomposed horse manure. Maybe didn't have anything else at the time. Quite a big area to mulch. And that had quite a lot of wood chip in, which is fine for fruit trees. I wouldn't use it on vegetable beds. And you can see the trees. I definitely recommend planting small trees, not big ones. They're cheaper, they're quicker and easier to plant, and they generally grow more quickly. and then they're easier to look at in year one as well. Just make nice healthy branches. Forwards, that's year one. You can see the few branches in year one on the left, becoming quite a few branches during year two. Those first 2 years, I'm intercropping one squash plant between each fruit tree. And then go forwards again, they're basically well-established trees now. They're coming into their 9th summer this year. But last year, the crops were not so good. And I think I've been pruning them too hard. I'm not a fruit expert, not so much as vegetables. And I'm always trying a few things. And particularly with the trees, I figured if I can keep them within reach, that's going to make it more manageable. But I think I took too long last winter. And then we had a lot of codling moth. Pests. Pests are becoming an issue generally. More to say about that for sure. These are giving nice fruit though, particularly the Lord Lambon on the left on M27 rootstock. If you've got a small garden, that's the one to go for above all. Very manageable small apple trees. And for fruit, plum trees on the right there, that Pixie rootstock, also very much my favorite. And I think I will mention it now. I'm going to shock you with what I'm going to say now, but believe it or not, this plum tree was almost killed this past summer by application of an organic approved compost from a well-known company called Dalefoot. And it's because they had put manure in their compost. I don't know if you knew that. I didn't know it at the time. And it was on their website as one of the ingredients, not on the sacks though. And it had something nasty in. Now, they have not totally agreed to this, but they've more or less acknowledged it by not putting manure in their compost anymore since this whole thing came to light with my problems. Probably better not say any more about that now. I've not made a big issue about this in public, but it does frustrate me because it shouldn't be happening. And I felt that their reaction to it was not as clear as it should have been, which in a way I understand. They got a business. And they're a great company in many other ways. A lot of what they're doing is really good. I guess we all have an Achilles heel. I'm welcome to have mine pointed out. So here we go. Mulching process again. That's homemade compost on the left. Only 6 weeks old after an experiment with hot composting. And on the right, then growing squash. Squash is such a great plant, or courgettes, even potatoes, for if you're killing weeds at the same time as mulching with polythene. And then you can take the polythene off. In this case, in October, weeds are gone. You've got to harvest. I had 55 kilos of cranberry and squash there. And there's still a bindweed. We can, using a trowel and mulches. Yeah, this was homemakers year one. That's how much bindweed I was taking on in the beginning process. And that's after 4 months of carpet. This is an old woolen carpet. It is not a synthetic modern carpet. I would not have used that. So this carpet actually in the end just degraded more quickly than I'd hoped actually. It got eaten by worms. They love it. But I managed to get 3 uses out of it, gently pulling it around the garden. And those bindweeds we removed with the trowel. Use this kind of method. So the trowel you might notice is copper. I love copper tools. They're less invasive soil energy. They stay sharp and smooth, shiny, easy to use. They don't rust. And implementations.co.uk is your access. There's a lot of suppliers that I use are listed on my website under Learn banner. There's a links page. So we're removing the bindweed and that goes on the compost heap. I am composting all my perennial weeds. Do not be afraid of doing that. You might have been scared to do so because you will have read the misinformation, which is quite common. So that's me and May proudly putting on bindweed on the compost heap. It's all goodness. And they're not invincible, these roots. That's the bottom line, as long as you smother them. And this was not a compost heap, not at that time. Most of these roots went on in the winter. In my first winter, it was cool. And yet they all disappeared. And at one turn, that's why bindweed is so hard to get rid of. It does indeed root almost forever, like mare's tail. Mare's tail is probably harder, actually. I had a guy come on a course here once and he said, I got rid of mare's tail by hoeing. It took 11 years, though. I don't think I'll go there. I think if he'd mulched, it might have been 3 or 4. Anyway, this is Edward, my son, with a small interval of time on the left and on the right. And it was his involvement in my YouTube that really kicked it off with the video we made in 2016, 4th summer, which is still one of the most viewed videos. It's had over 3.5 million views now. Well, it's on the algorithms for YouTube, which is great. And people love it. So it just keeps trundling out there. And YouTube more than anything has really put this work, this method on the map. And here you can see my approach to annual weeds. So I've talked a lot about perennials so far, not so much about annuals. You know, very important distinction. Annuals are the ones that grow from seed and can easily take over by sheer number rather than persistence. And the trick is to hoe them small. So those fat 10 on the left, which are coming from some not well rotted cow manure, are fat hen. And for me, that's big weeds. The old saying is hoe your weeds before you see them. And odd as it might sound, that is almost true. A hint of green is all that you need to see. That shows the weed seeds are germinating. And it's time to get out the hoe or rake, or in a small area, just scuff the soil with a trowel even, or your fingers. You know, if it's just a small bed, you could do it with your fingers. No dig is lovely because you've always got this soft, friable surface, which is open to just a bit of movement on the surface. That's all one is doing here. This is not digging in any way. It's not going in deep. Hoeing should be shallow and effortless, and it's a quick way to get rid of small seedlings. If the weather is too wet, as so often in Chagford, you need to hand weed, and if you're going to hand weed, small again is beautiful. So that's how I look to do my weeding. And this links to another key piece of advice, which is stay on the front foot, look for weeds rather than them looking for you. You know, you should be noticing weeds and not being overwhelmed by them when they get big. This is the lazy way to grow potatoes, as in lazy beds, except it's a variation of the Irish lazy bed. In the Irish lazy bed, they, I guess, didn't have access to compost, so they would put the seed potato on the grass and flip the soil over using their Irish shovel, which is like a spade, and that the soil from the other side would sit upside down on the potato, which would then develop under the humus top layer, and the weeds would be suppressed as well. So using compost, and in this case, a bit of old hay, is an equivalent method, but using organic matter and kind of easier. And this illustrates the how no dig potatoes work. It links to a question I'm often asked, like, you know, okay, so how would no dig? Yeah, the problem is the wording is wrong. You don't dig them out, you pull them. So you get your hands around all the stems at the same time and gently pull upwards, and that eases out your harvest. You can see how they're still attached. That's all I've done there. I'm at a screen top right, gently pulling. But you can also see there the little roots of the potatoes going down. So potatoes themselves can root into very firm clay soil, which is what this is. It's very, very clay soil here. But the tubers can't develop in that, and that's where this surface layer wants to be smooth. That's my secret for growing potatoes. Give them a nice friable top layer, mostly compost. But you can see also there are some potatoes nestling in the surface, so you need to do a bit of rummage with maybe a trowel just to ease them out. Here's another example of potatoes, and it's one I used in a recent video. It was mulches by a company called Chimney Sheep, and one is a wool mat and one is a jute mat. And I preferred the wool because it's homemade, as in UK farming, and just simply put it on the grass, and then it came in a big box, so I put the cardboard of the box between for the path. Then we spread some compost, initially about 5 centimeters, 2 inches, and then we up the compost to about 12 centimeter, 5 inches. By March was ready then. We also did a bit of cardboarding around the edges. You can see edges is really important. You know, going back to what I was saying about paths, edges and paths, pay attention. They can unlock a lot of your good work if you let weeds come back in through the edge. So I tend to take my edge further than it sometimes needs to be, just to have weed-free edge. That's planting the potatoes, giving you an idea of spacing we use area. These are home-saved Charlotte seed. This was during lockdown, and I hadn't planned to grow potatoes here first. And then lockdown happened. Two things resulting. One, you couldn't buy any more seed. And the second was, oh, maybe this winter there's going to be a shortage of potatoes. So I thought, right, I'll grow potatoes here. And I still had some Charlotte seed because it stores so well. And I rummaged through to find nice medium-sized shaped ones, the ones I like really. They could have a bit of green on, that's fine. You know, you can use your green potatoes for seed potato, pop them in using a trowel to the depth such that you've got 5 to 2 inches of compost above the top of each seed potato. And then you step back and watch them grow. The other thing we were doing here was removing a bit of bindweed, because there was quite a bit here. Combination of the mulching and then the potatoes, it didn't really stand much chance, but I was pulling any I saw. There was a bit of couch grass too. That's now finished. And the growth was just lovely to see. As you see the different color there between the wool and the jute, there was a difference. The wool grew more potatoes per square meter. The jute area is slightly larger as it happens. But per square meter, the wool did a little bit better, and it's the same with the leeks. I won't spend a long time debating that one. It's quite interesting. And then as soon as the leek harvest happened, July the 13th, I was ready with leek transplants sown in between the 2nd and 5th of April. That's my date for sowing leeks. Check out my sowing timeline on the website, or by my calendar if you haven't already, or my diary. For these dates are so important. They will be similar for you in Chagford, you know, maybe 5-10 days later in the spring, but probably not more actually. I suspect your last frost date in May is no different to here, because we're in a frost holiday. You've got cold winds, you know, it kind of balances out in many ways at night time anyway. So the leeks are going as strong transplants, and that makes a difference. You know, it means you can get a second harvest more viably. And this multi-sowing method is so you can see how you don't get perfect straight leeks, but what the heck, they're lovely leeks, and they're not buried deep, so they're quicker and easier to plant. They're quicker and easier to pull out. The only proviso is, and it's going to be interesting over this next week, I need to get in there more and see what's happened after these quite deep frosts, -6. Sorry, how much might have changed with the leek stem if there is any frost damage. Right, moving forwards again. Yeah, no leek parsnips. You know, it's so beautiful, as you can see from those long thin roots, how they go down. Carrots too, you know, it's not so much a question of whether they go down, it's more how you get them out. I do use a spade to lever. This is sowing no-dig carrots. So key for this is slug prevention. I would say this in sowing seeds, carrots and parsnips are the only seeds I sow direct. Well, you could add garlic, potatoes, that. The only small seeds I sow direct are carrots and parsnips, because I don't want to break the taproot when transplanting. That's the reason why. It is also quicker as it happens, but then you got quite a lot of thinning to do. But basically, what I'm doing is drawing drills in the surface compost, no wooden sides, no habitat around for slugs. The ground is mostly clear. You know, coming back to what I was saying about bare soil, it's bare, but it's not bare. It's covered in compost mulch, but there are not swaths of anything growing where there would be slugs living. If you want to succeed with an early sowing of carrot or an early planting of lettuce or spinach, you must have slug-free environment in our climate. You know, yeah, sure, different if you're in Arizona, but in the UK, most of the UK anyway, that's the case. And so there's another interesting one too. You know, the bold statement, you should never walk on your beds, doesn't apply with no dig. As you can see, I'm walking on the carrot bed of all beds because I want to conserve moisture for my newly sown seed. It was spring equinox, 22nd March, and it was dry. So for me, that's keeping the moisture in. Walking on beds is fine. Doesn't damage structure, it just firms the surface. And mid-June, we're already harvesting quite a few carrots by then, and also interplanting Brussels sprouts. My carrot Brussels sprout succession for me illustrates the beauty of no-dig more than anything else, because this is 2 magnificent crops in the same year from one bed with no application of compost in a whole year. So Brussels sprouts, in traditional language, heavy feeders, are growing in what has already grown a lot of carrots. That's coming up to final harvest on July, as you can see, and the Brussels sprouts already growing. And they're just not getting any more goodness for best part of a year between their planting. Well, between the time they're planting and the harvest, nothing. I'll come back to that. This is a quick look at my trials. So yeah, wow, 15:33. So I'm just working out the timing here. I need to keep moving fast. I'm going to really whistle through these because you can see a lot about my trials on the trials page of my website. I recommend that. And it's got this dig no dig one, which is the 2 beds side by side. In one, I put compost in the trench. In one, I put the same amount of compost on top. That was first year. This is now going in 7 years, 6, 7, and 8. Nice drone shot showing it overhead dig bed on the left. no dig on the right. By September, there's not much difference. It's in the spring the difference is more strong, and over the season as a whole, the harvests are generally stronger with no dig. So for less input of time and effort, you are getting more result. You know, this trial alone, it's not a scientific trial, I hasten to add, but should be enough to convert a lot of people. In fact, it has, I know it has some. It's fascinating, you know, growth. Between the dig and no dig, there's only one planting potatoes, which in the last few years has been slightly strong, but pretty much everything else. The no dig bed in every photograph is on the right, and these photos are pretty much on my website, so you have time there to compare them at your leisure. I can't do that now because I'm running out of time, but it's just to give you a flavor of it. And the photo on the right is a whole year after the first drone shot. We get one most years now, and everything on the right is second planting again. So that bed has already given a full set of harvests in June, July. Then from September to December, it gives a whole full set again. Each of those beds is giving over 100 kilos. No, sorry, not each. The dig bed doesn't actually, not quite. But the no dig bed gives over 100 kilos of harvest every year. 1.5 meter wide, 5 meter long. Don't try and grow too much an area. Concentrate on less, crop it more. You'll enjoy it more. You'll get better results. Life will be easier. You'll eat more. And things like this too, watering. Much better infiltration with no dig. This was microscope analysis. Woman in Norway, I posted samples to, and no idea what the result would be. Oh, I was amazed, you know, and she was pointing out how basically what that microscope shot is showing is better aggregation, to use that rather technical term, in the no dig. People talk a lot about aggregation now. They didn't used to. It's about structuring a soil and soil being in mini lumps rather than loose and fibrous. And that's the problem with tilling, digging, cultivating. All those lovely aggregates are being broken up, and to the uneducated eye, they're solidly and loose. But when you understand about soil life, it looks revolting, and until soil is definitely best. These guys, BBC Beech Grove in Scotland, this was on television 2 or 3 years ago. They set up a dig no dig trial. They were skeptics. For me, that really validates this trial even more. They didn't think it would work, and they were blown away. Jim McColl, who was 80 years old at the time it started, you know, a man of 80 changing his mind. I'm really take my hat off to him. And he did, big time. He could see, no dig really works. They flew me up there to take part in the program. It's really fun. And the RHS, you know, they're really on board now, at least at Wisley, but pretty much generally. I was amazed recently to see the headline, RHS Chelsea Flower Show, if it happens. They're going to judge exhibits partly on the quality of their soil. I'm only intrigued how they're going to measure that. But this is Wisley, where they're really embracing no dig. And so are Kew Gardens. You know, Kew Gardens is the heartbeat of training gardeners in the UK. They're training the head gardeners of the future. They are now fully no dig, both in their kitchen garden on the right, a lovely lady called Helena Dove, and in their student gardens on the right, each student has a bed. They used to be marked on their digging, rather like Nikki was describing in the beginning, even double digging. Now they are no dig, every single one of those beds. You know, it's exciting times. This is just one beautiful aspect of no dig, or something that's made a lot easier by no dig, and it massively increases our possibilities. It's something you can explore and experiment with in your garden. Intersow, interplant, there's just 2 examples there. Sowing carrots between lettuce, which are still cropping. So we pick the lettuce every week, remove the outer leaves. And the Swedes, like all brassicas, I remove the lower leaves as they decay. The plants don't need them anymore. In the case of the Swedes, that frees up the ground underneath to do an interplant. And the timing with Swedes works really well for lamb's lettuce. So that's my interplant there. You can see it in the latest small garden video, how it looks at this very moment. And they're coming up for crops. That's a way of increasing your growing season. If you've got 2 crops growing simultaneously for a certain time, you've added between 4 and 6 weeks on average to the growing season. Carrots don't take a lot of time and space to germinate and get going. Nor do radish even, get going a bit more quickly. And with the tomatoes there, I thought, well, I'll give this a go. Actually, in undersowed, you know, you can undersow, you can underplant. I sowed spinach. Perfect date for sowing spinach, August 9th, 10th, maybe the 8th in Chagford. The idea being to get it really, have it so that it can really get going before winter. And the tomatoes are still cropping, you know, they don't mind spinach growing. getting going underneath their roots, they probably actually quite enjoy this mycorrhizal association probably happening there. I don't think anyone's actually studied this. I am pretty sure that that's what's going on because of the stuff, how this works, and it needs some scientists to have a look. In fact, I have got a scientist working with me now measuring some of these things, so it'll be interesting to see what she finds out. Spinach and lettuce, yeah, that just works really well. That was something I dared to try, popping in multi-zone beetroot between onions, close planted. You know, it doesn't look like there's room sometimes for doing these things, and yet it works. That's all I can say. You know, other things too, breaking the rules. Fennel. Almost any gardening advice magazine book you read will say something like fennel does not like other plants, or other plants do not like fennel, how it might be, a bad companion. You see on Pinterest boards all the time, you know, these very strict rules. Plants you should not plant near other plants, or, you know, plants that like other plants, or it's always presented in those black and white terms. It's not true. It's not like that. It's about how well plants associate in terms of their growing conditions at the time, what light and moisture their roots need. And in my experience, fennel works really well with almost every other vegetable, as you can see there, interplanting it between spinach and lettuce. And I think in the next photo, yeah, this bed, there's a whole video about 1 year of planting in this one bed, and the amazing series of interplants I did in that middle section, where I started off with spinach in the middle from a planting made the October previous, and I planted fennel between it in late March. And at first, this is February sown fennel. The fennel looked just completely dwarfed every time the spinach grew, but it disappeared, hung in there. Then we twisted out spinach May the 10th. You can see then that fennel grew nicely. Before the fennel had even finished, I underplanted French beans. You can just see them there in late May. French fruit, before they'd finished, I underplanted winter radish, which are in the photograph on the right. So that's 4 plantings, 4 harvests in 1 year from one bit of ground, with no added compost or anything else. That is no dig. That is the beauty of this method, and also very little worries about weeds. You know, that bit I hardly weed. Obviously, if I'm passing, it's usually when I'm passing, I'll see a weed, I'll pull it out. That's how I do my weeding. This is looking a bit more detail at the Brussels sprout carrot interplant, and again, made so much easier because there's almost no weeds. So the carrots we can concentrate on just regular harvesting, a few soon after Brussels are planted, and then a few more every week. So we're getting our harvests. So that's money coming in while the carrots are getting established, and then gradually there's no more carrots and the Brussels grow. And the other nice thing on is the overlap with the mesh, because mesh helps keep carrot root fly off. It also helps Brussels sprouts to grow in terms of keeping the insects off. This year I managed to keep the mesh on until mid-August, and then you can see it was a wider mesh, so that was possible. Then it grew up, and I needed before the insects flew underneath. And I do then use roughly 20-day intervals Bacillus thuringiensis bacterial spray, soil bacteria, and that keeps caterpillars at bay. And that's the lovely sprouts by November, and then onwards. I'm still picking them now. So it's 2 crops in a year from one application of compost, and not much other work really. The application of compost for the following year has already gone on in any time from late October. The ground is clear underneath, easy to do because we de-leaf the low leaves. This is another trial, 3 strip. I'm going to whistle through this one actually, time-wise. If I'm running low on time, I don't know if there's a way that you can alert me, but I'm open to be told. Again, this 3 strip, one of the things that I've discovered from this trial experiment, whatever you call it, is strip 1, we fork once a year, and as in loosening but not inverting soil. And if anything, that has been decreasing the yield from the bed or the strip next to it, where there is no loosening and the same compost applied. So again, saving time, save work. I think forking damages fungal networks. Yeah, this is not mentioned. Why? People talk about broad forking as though it's no dig. Why? It's not. You know, throw away your broad fork. You know, there might just be the odd time you need to use it, as your garden has been a building site for the last 6 months and it's just rock, not even compacted soil, you know, that kind of thing. But basically broad forks, no, you don't need them. Interesting one too about rotation. So here within the 3-strip trial, I'm trialing beds across with no rotation just to see. Maybe this needs rethinking. Rotation, language rotation is based on tilling. It's based on soil that has been cultivated and damaged. Maybe that's why rotation is more necessary. The soil needs every help it can get to grow nice crops. All I can say is that here, that's 5th year in a row of growing cabbages in the same beds, and then 6th year in this case with potatoes. Even I'd had blackleg a bit in one place, disappeared 6th year. Lovely harvest. Then the potatoes are followed by leeks in the 6th year again on the right. Cabbages following broad beans both in the 6th year on the left. Well, I think the pictures say it all really. I'm amazed by this photograph. I'm not saying for 1 minute I'd go on for us. I even hesitated. I've transplanted broad beans following those cabbage again this December in the same space, 7 years in a row. But if it was my garden, not a trial, I think I'd stop there. I think I've proved the point really. 5-6 years, maybe then it's time for a change. But anyway, it means that, what it means really is that you don't have to feel guilty if you don't do a 4-year rotation. Why 4 years? No, as though it's written in stone. It's just, no, question it all. Question so many things that you advised and had before. You need explanations. We all need explanations for why things really happen and what the reason is for things being said. That is soil pest protection using netting or mesh. The bird netting I use also against deer. I've got a few deer at the moment coming in. I need to get net over some chard. They're eating a bit. The bacillus is very useful. Wouldn't be without that, but only for a while in autumn and only on brassicas. For wild rocket there, for example, difficult to keep flea beetles off, but I have found the very finest grade of mesh is brilliant. So if you want to keep flea beetles off spring plantings in particular, that's the mesh you need. It's the very finest grade. For most spring plantings, I'm looking for warmth. Sorry, that was my timer. That means I've reached 1 minute, 1 hour 10. I'm just going to whiz through a few more slides and then I'll stop to open question answers. I don't know about you guys, but I don't mind going on a little bit longer than the scheduled time because I do want to share this information. There's another time saver that hardening off is not strictly necessary, not if you cover with fleece. So that everything there has been planted, things straight out the greenhouse without hardening off, then fleeced over. Cold springs, and then growth really takes off in May and June from getting your early plantings in place. And all the early plantings are cold resistant vegetables, like on the left, warmth tender crops we only put out on the right, like courgettes, after mid-May in my case. That's Chinese cabbage on the left there. That's probably the most difficult plant to keep pests off, closely followed by carrots. And I keep carrot root fly off with the mesh. But having said that, we got some late this year. It really vexed me. How did they get in there? I don't know. This is succession enabled by propagation. So much, not so much. A lot of what I'm explaining does need good propagation. If you're not a great propagator, you learn much because there is so much you can do with strong, healthy plants. You need good compost. West Riding Company, Moreland Gold in Yorkshire, I really like. They're organic approved for 12, 13 years now. They've always served me well. And this is a key bit of advice I give is plant small. So don't wait until you've got enormous plants. With no dig, you should have healthy soil. You've got a stable ecosystem there. You've got beetles that are going to eat your slugs, that kind of thing. People ask, why haven't you got slug damage? Putting out tiny seedlings a lot, baby carrots growing from seed and so on. Well, if you look at the ground there's no wooden sides. Like I keep saying, there's no straw mulch in the paths. The ground is bare except for the vegetables growing, and we keep on it. I think also I do biodynamic preparation 500 spring and autumn. I do a bit more energy farming than that I haven't got time to mention now, but I could at the end if you want. I'm just working flat out to keep soil in top condition. And there again, you can see pretty small lettuce plants and how fast they grow in just over 3 weeks there between those two photographs of that lovely bed of coloured lettuce and the onions maturing on the right, that became bed of chicories and so on. And even pak choi, that's the litmus test of whether you're on top of slugs. Can you grow pak choi and Chinese cabbage? And if I'm gonna grow anything with slug holes, it's always going to be pak choi and Chinese cabbage, but mostly it's not too bad. I use the mesh there mainly for fleece again, flea beetles, and patch oil on the right there, and then new planting of spring onions in the middle. So transplants again, that's leek plants on the right, which I've let grow big. Spinach going out pretty small. Our second planting after curry. We're whipping in these second plantings, succession planting as soon as in the summer. Summer's such a flat out time. Every day in July is worth 2 days in August, 4 in September, 8 in October, and the whole of December. You know, it goes exponentially. You've got to be on it in July. You're slowly scaling down as the seasons lengthen, shorten, a day shorten going to autumn, and you can put your feet up at this, obviously. And then, yeah, broccoli, early potatoes. Just a quick look at succession. The broccoli followed by beetroot, potatoes by chicory. Peas on the end were followed by celeriac, which were all there. I popped them in under the peas. And I'll finish with these few potters, which is just a nice range of succession options going through the seasons. So, you know, just between those two pictures, subtract 20 from 317 days, that's all. A lot of the growing has already been done in the greenhouse and the cover's in place so that that explosion of growth can happen. And then in summer, there's a new explosion of growth, which is the second planting. So the broad beans finish, followed by cabbage, the potatoes finish, followed by leeks, and so on. Then going into July, just on its own, what I was saying about July being the most amazing month, there is only 18 days between those two pictures. Look at the beans on the left, the climbing beans, 18 days. You know, that has happened in 18 days. It just blows my mind to look at it. And then scaling down towards the autumn, and as beds come empty in the autumn, we start to apply the compost for the year ahead, so that as soon as the planting's finished, the soil is mulched and covered. And polytunnel cropping, well, I could say more, but I'll stop. If I'm going to stop screen sharing, you can give me some feedback at this point. All right, stop share. Okay, hi.
Hi, Charles. Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Is that good? Is that good time-wise?
That's brilliant time-wise. Thank you. And
okay.
Although we're only about 10 minutes from the scheduled finish time, if you're happy to stay, I'm sure some of us would like to stay a little bit longer and ask questions. That would be wonderful. And of course, if people...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, well, I said, I don't mind going on a bit, you know, if you've got a lot of questions. Let's fire away.
Brilliant. So I just said at the beginning, but I think some people missed me, that you can raise your hand digitally by clicking on participants on the participants bottom at the bottom of your screen.
I can see also you've got 21 questions in the chat box. Little red number there.
We've got some chats going on, and I think I've just pointed people to put up their hand digitally by pressing participants at the bottom of their screen. So if you'd like to ask a question, if you can raise your hand using the participants button, that will bring up a white screen on the right hand side. Brilliant. And I can see who's asking, and I will unmute you or ask you to unmute. Hopefully that will work. Great. So we've got a question from Ziggy Woodward.
I've got too many questions actually. Sorry.
Hello.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was wondering if I could plug an event. Would that be okay? Yes, shall I go ahead? Yeah, I help to run a seed swap in Southampton every year. It's not going to happen the usual way. We're going to be doing a bunch of virtual talks, one of which would be on the, excuse me, Thursday the 25th of February from 8 till 9:15. And it's with Sophia Buggs, and it's on using indoor plants as food, medicine, and in spiritual practice. We've got a whole bunch of other stuff coming up, but that's the thing that's been firmed up at the moment. So I hope that's okay for me to have mentioned that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. And it looks like we've got a question from Astrid.
Hello. Hi. Thank you. I've got two quick questions. I hope they're quick anyway. One is, Charles, which seeds do you start off with planting first thing, and when? So we're in January now. What's the first thing you'll put in the ground as seeds? And my second question is, what sort of compost bin system do you use to make, and do you make a bit of your own compost?
Oh yeah. Okay, thanks for those. Can you hear me? Is this working? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. If I just take the second question first, because it's the bit of my talk I didn't get to. I thought I could go through my talk more quickly, but about making compost, and yeah, clearly that's key. I can make now here 6 tons a year of compost. Some of that is from material brought in, like coffee grounds from local cafes and what have you, paper, cardboard, whatever it might be. But I can make 6 tons of compost. I'm using 8 maybe on my vegetable beds, so I'm almost self-sufficient in compost. And for the rest of it, I'm using I get a bit of well-rotted horse manure that I use for my hotbed, for example, in the greenhouse. That becomes compost. And I buy a little bit of green waste and mushroom, more than anything, to keep trying them, because I want to have them here to advise people about using them. So, you know, any good compost you can buy. And if you've got access to a lot of wood chip, that's another source of fertility. I'm using quite a bit of that. I've got various heaps of wood chip around the garden now, which are maturing for up to 2 years, and that becomes compost. As to what compost or what seeds I use, my favorite seed company is Bingenheim in Germany. And of course, with Brexit, that's become an issue. Recently, however, they have said they are supplying the UK. After all, they've ticked all the forms they need to and paid their fee. You can also get their seeds from Seed Co-op in Lincolnshire. Very well worth a look. That's a true cooperative, and it's a biodynamic organic as well. Real seeds as well. I also use some commercial companies like Marshall's. Partly again, so I'm advising gardeners a lot, and if I don't use any of those people, I don't know what the gardeners are up against. And I've had some shocking experience with those seed companies, but you know, sometimes you might need to hunt around for the seeds you want and not be afraid of buying them from the devil, and sometimes they might be non-organic as well. So yeah, in terms of finally timing, Valentine's Day, start mid-February. Don't sow any seed before that. There's a nice old saying: if you sow seeds in January, you won't have to eat anything, despite what you read on social media. Don't show anything yet.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. And I think we've got a question from let's have a look. Lynn. Thanks, Lynn.
Hi, sorry. Hi, I had a similar question to Astrid, but another one. A neighbour just got stuck on the hill at the beginning of this chat, so I had to disappear for a moment or two. And I missed the bit that you were talking about when you're making the paths and building the compost, putting the layers of cardboard on. Can you very quickly go over that bit again? Sorry.
Okay, well, I don't mind re-emphasizing it because I think it's such an important point, and important to have clean paths. Aim for no wooden sides. That means you've got to have a clean path, otherwise the weeds spread in. And it's all about year 1, which is when you're starting with weeds. If you're not starting with weeds, you don't need the cardboard. I should mention that, because otherwise I've noticed how people equate no dig with cardboard, and it's like, no, it's only a tool used if you've got a lot of weeds, particularly perennials starting out. But yeah, lay it on the weeds, no soil disturbance. And if weeds grow through the cardboard that you've put in your paths, you need to simply put more cardboard on top until you see no more weeds growing through. That means the perennial weeds could be couch grass, buttercups, dandelions, ground elder, you know, almost any of these horror weeds that people quote. They can die within a year, and then once they are dead, no more cardboard needed. And wood shavings wood chip is a good mulch from then on. And the wood chips is not only about depriving weed seeds of light, but it's also about feeding the fungal network in soils. That's where, you know, soils are a valuable part of your garden. Path soil. Path soil is not dead soil. Just because you happen to be walking on it, it does not mean it's compact and dead. And we notice here in dry summers that plants on the edges of the beds are growing bigger than the ones in the middle. And I reckon that's because they can feed into the moisture in pathways, which is otherwise not used. And if you've got no weeds there, that also helps. But it emphasizes how the path soil is an important part for your plant growth. You know, plants are using that soil. So weed-free paths, yeah. Right.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think we've also got a question now. People are not lowering their hands, so if I get confused, Alison? Yep. Thank you.
Maybe she needs to unmute.
I'll just ask her again.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I make liquid fertilizer from various things like comfrey, but also bindweed and ground elder. What's your opinion about feeding with that, with liquid fertilizer?
Okay, well, you can if you want, and it can work sometimes, but my approach is about feeding the soil and doing no more than that. And part of that is about saving time. You know, this is another job, making a liquid feed, often quite smelly as well, although there are ways of doing it without having smell. But yeah, I just don't see it as necessary. So when soil is well fed through good mulching, nice compost in a correct amount, your plants, you can see from my photographs, they grow fine without any liquid feeding. So it's an option. That's as much as I'd say.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got a question from Lucy.
Oh, hi there. I may have missed this, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating as well. Thanks for all the information. It's brilliant. Specifically about bindweed, and on your beds, you've got your cardboard all around the edge. On our veg plot, which is probably 2 meters by 6 meters, it's right up against the fence edge with the neighbour, and bindweed is a problem right there on that fence boundary. And I just wondered, if that were you, would you put a cardboard barrier between the fence and the start of the veg bed as well, or what would the neighbouring bindweed? I'm not blaming the neighbour. It's all over. You know, bindweed is
Sure. I'm very familiar with that issue. I've got exactly the same here. One of my beds, I can see at the window here, is a wooden fence, and the neighbour's bed on the other side, it gives me horror to look at it. It's full of actually ivy in this case, and that ivy just keeps growing under the fence, and I just have to keep pulling it. And I'm not putting any cardboard down. Like I say, I do not advocate continual use of cardboard, and it gets in the way eventually, harbours slugs. So when you said about my bed surrounded by cardboard, that was only in the very beginning, you know, and sometimes in year 2, but not beyond that. So it's not a long-term strategy using cardboard. I've got another edge with the same neighbor where he's got a lot of bindweed on the other side. And what I noticed was in the first couple of years here, that bindweed grew quite ferociously under the fence and came up in my beds. This is in my small garden, actually. And since then, with repeat pulling and using a trowel to lever out the bits of root I could get out, and this was even through gravel, there's a bit of residual gravel from previous use, it's not a problem anymore. But it comes back to that central point, persistence, when you see it. And in that initial couple of years, bindweed here, I had a bit of a horror experience in the far part of my garden, years 1 and 2. You know, there was a lot, and it just kept coming back, and it did feel like the Sisyphean task of rolling the boulder uphill forever. But suddenly, you know, I remember going out, it was one August day 2014, there's hardly any bindweed here, where previously a couple of weeks earlier I'd have been going out and finding loads. It just stopped. These roots are not invincible, but your point is valid. There's still vigor beyond the fence, and you've just got to keep on it, but it becomes less onerous with time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got a question from Heather.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I'm quite interested in your no rotation, or not being a slave to rotation. And I'm wondering how you cope with blight in tomatoes.
Oh, brilliant. That's actually 2 questions in one, but you've kind of nailed it, because taking blight first of all, you know, blight has actually nothing to do with rotation. It's a massive misunderstanding promoted by bad teaching from people like the RHS and Monty Don, who frighten people into thinking they've got to burn their blighted leaves. You know, has anyone tried to burn green leaves? It's like, you know, it's physically not possible. Blight spores do not survive in soil and compost. You know, that's the key point. This is scientific fact, and I don't know why it gets so ignored. Therefore, if you say you've had blight in your greenhouse, your soil is not contaminated with blight by the following spring. All the blight is dead by the following spring. You can plant tomatoes there without any worries. I have proved this to myself by composting some blighted plants I had one year through October and November when I was clearing polytunnel, made compost, spread that compost in the polytunnel in May, planted tomatoes through it, no problem with blight. You know, seriously. So think of blight differently. So that's just one aspect of your question. No rotation. Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm learning about this as well. All I can say is I'm amazed at the success of 6 years in a row, same crop. Didn't expect it. But it highlights, you know, how healthy soil can do more than we've imagined. And I had a lovely feedback recently from Jane Eldridge, I think it is, from Oxton's Organics, where they're no-dig on quite a big scale market garden. And she said this year that she's been market for 30 years using a rotavator. Then her son Jake got involved. He's really into no-dig. They went no-dig, I think 3 years ago. And she said they'd always battled with leek white rot. You know, this is a classic one for blight because it persists, and you can't grow leeks there for another 10 years, or whatever the figure given is, 7 maybe. She said that suddenly they haven't got, she couldn't believe it. She was going around the garden, the market garden this autumn, no allium white rot. You know, I'll just throw that one out there. It's like, this is not a proven fact, but be prepared to be surprised, and don't be a slave to rotation. That's a nice way of putting it. For many of us, or many of you particularly, if you've got a small garden, you know, you haven't got a lot of space, so you only want to eat certain things. It really frees you up to grow what you want to eat.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Are you happy to continue, Charles? Because we've got a few more questions here.
Yeah, sure.
Great.
Yeah.
And next is Rose.
Hello.
That was me.
Hi.
She's still muted.
Sorry, Rose. Can you unmute yourself again?
Hello.
Thank you.
Is anyone else here from the States, or is it just me?
Just you, I think.
You all look so wide awake, and when I signed up for this class, I knew that Charles, of course, was in the UK, but of course I didn't think about the time change, and we've been a little busy here in the States with some interesting political things going on. So, but anyways, I have a question about pests. Charles, do you guys have whitefly at all? And can you speak about, you know, I've never spray. I'm no till. I'm no dig, and you know, I don't have problems with pests because generally having really healthy plants, I don't have that issue. But for some reason, this last year, the whitefly found my garden, and they're just not fun.
Okay. Right. So I didn't realize it's Proper Job International.
Yes.
I'm really impressed. You reach a long way. So yeah, okay. First of all, I'll just echo your thoughts. I hope you survive. I hope that man lives us above all, you know, at the allotted time, if not before.
Oh my goodness, this has been the longest 4 years of my life.
maybe the bad energies coming out of the White House are affecting these whitefly. But seriously, you know, I'm intrigued by this. I think it is a question of soil health, because I used to get whitefly more than I get them now. And I think as time goes on, as your soil builds its health from being no-till, mulched every year more and more, you get stronger plants. And you know, just linking back to what aphids are and why they're there. Aphids home in on weak plants. You know, I suspect there's some weakness in your plant that's getting them in there. That could come from, say, underwatering. Maybe you had a really dry summer and your brassicas were struggling a bit for lack of moisture. You know, that's one possibility or an example of when whitefly can come in. If it's not that and your soil is mulch, maybe it just needs a bit more mulch. It's those kinds of things. That's the way I'm always looking at pests. Two exceptions. You know, the caterpillars, worms, you call them, Bacillus thuringiensis, for example, or just squashing them by hand. The other one with aphids is just spraying them off with water. If they're really bad, that's more a temporary solution, but that's all I would ever do with aphids. And I really hope that once you have a good president, your whitefly. Sorry to be political.
Thank you. And we've got a question from Lisa.
Hi there, everyone. My question is about manure. I didn't see, Charles, I didn't see you using any or talking much about manure. You did have a great pile of it, but you don't incorporate it in the compost at all. And I'm thinking of plants that really like manure, like generally potatoes and you know, rhubarb. Do you really reserve it for trees only as a mulch, or do you incorporate it in some of the veg growing?
Okay, thanks for that. It's quite a good one, actually. That, yeah, well, manure is compost in the end. You know, manure in the form we use it. So I do use some manure. It's a very, very difficult word because, you know, that single word manure is applied to substances incredibly varied, from fresh manure to beautiful black crumbly compost. Generally speaking, I think the way that you're using it is, you know, our normal lumpy farmyard manure, whatever. I don't see it as necessary, but I'll use it if it's there. I can grow lovely potatoes and rhubarb without it. And that statement you made about how, you know, it's seen that potatoes and rhubarb, for example, need manure or benefit from manure.
Black
you know,
currants, you know, the gross,
yeah,
gross feeders.
Yeah, but that comes from that lexicon of feeding the plants.
Okay.
You know, going back to what I was saying. So
it's just often it's free, so I thought it's quite nice. Yeah. I have heavy clay, and I've been trying to break out.
Well, no, brilliant. I mean, what I'm not saying is that I've got anything against manure.
Okay.
Yeah. If it was free and I didn't have any homemade composting, yeah, I'd use it. And when I arrived here, I didn't have enough compost, nothing like of my own, even what I could buy. You know, I had access to loads of well-rotted cow manure, so I used that a lot in Homemaker's first year.
Oh, that's good.
Now I find I'm pretty much making. Sorry.
It's good to know. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Well, anyway, there you go. So, just you know, on the compost heap question, I will put manure sometimes in the compost heap, but actually at the moment I'm not, and mainly that's because I'm worried about aminopyralid. I don't know if any of you heard of that one. Just keep an eye out for it. Pyralid, Pyralid. Google it if you're not sure. Weed killer, made by the evil corporation called Dow, and that is getting very widespread now. It persists in mostly in horse manure, but it's even in cow manure. So do be careful of that one if farmers have sprayed it as a weed killer on grass, which animals then eat. That's why I'm careful of manure now more than anything.
And worming of horses may be involved.
Oh, sorry?
Worming of horses maybe not good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we don't know. Nobody's researched this properly. It's outrageous, the things that are allowed.
Thank you. Thank you. And we've got a question from Liam.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. How are you doing?
All right.
So thank you very much for this wonderful presentation and exchange of information. It's in my real job, I'm a teacher as well myself, and I have to say I find your presentation outstanding and very clear, and a great gift to us all who are trying to do a bit of gardening. So I just have a question really about starting off, and I have your book here, and I've been looking at a few things and trying to study what you're saying. And I suppose if I'm starting off in a new patch, Charles, where it's quite wild, like some of the pictures there in your book, how long is it before I can plant in it? Like if I start preparing it with a mulch, I'll probably use a cardboard and a weave and a few things like you had.
Okay.
How long before I can plant? Or the approach I've taken before with a new area of ground is to plant potatoes in it using the lazy bed system you talked about there, the Irish one in the past. But I'd like to be a bit more ambitious if I can. So. Okay.
Well, the answer is very simple. Approximately the time you need to wait between mulching massive weeds and planting, preferably planting more than sowing, is no time at all.
No, good.
Have a cup of tea and then crack on. So the understanding being that if you've used enough compost, preferably if it's thick weeds, you know, this is what I've had here and I still have in the corners I'm doing, applying 6 inches, 15 centimeter compost on top of the cardboard gives you a very rapid entry point and enables that straight away planting. So you get your money back partly by it being enabled to do this, and you can crop you know, within a few months from planting immediately. So your plants are rooting into the compost and the weeds are dying, and then within about 3 months, say, the weeds are more or less not all dead underneath. You still got to weed the perennial weeds that come through, pull them out. But your plants then, from 3 months approximately almost, they're rooting into the soil below, having started life in the compost above. So hope that makes sense. But you know, side by side with this, there's nothing wrong with making a bed now, which I recommend, because we've got time now, making beds now that are ready then for planting in the spring. So you can basically, you can make a no-dig bed at any time of year. Whatever your longer term plan is, just do it when you have time, when you have materials.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Liam, and thanks for your comments.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you. And we've got a question from Grace.
Hi there. I just had a quick question about irrigation. Is there leaky hose or anything laid under the beds there? Or how do you recommend managing the irrigation in the summer? I did read an article saying about those heat waves predicted for this year, so I'm just thinking about it.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, for one thing, I would say don't believe that article. Nobody knows, you know. They can't predict the weather more than 3 days in advance. So anyway, it's good copy for journalists. But yeah, there's no doubt about it. Having said that, that hot, dry weather is getting more common in the UK at least. And more than that, no dig really helps, because you're not disturbing soil, you're not losing moisture. All the mycorrhizal fungi are there and other fungi, and that helps network plants' roots to find moisture which is there in tiny crevices that they wouldn't be able to access just by rooting, as we understand it. So your plants can access more moisture through no dig. I do not have any system of irrigation here. I certainly would never put a plastic hose under the bed. I just don't ever think in terms of doing that. Whatever anyone else might say, you do not want plastic in your beds. And I find I don't need it on top either. You know, hand watering is brilliant because it keeps you in contact with your plants. You've got to find a bit more time for sure, but you can be more precise, you're more efficient with the water, and it probably stops you overwatering. I think a lot of people overwater. So when you're giving water, do it less often, but a little bit more each time. It's good between waterings to allow the surface to dry out. That's a really important understanding, and really applicable at the moment in polytunnels. I've not watered I've got salads growing in my polytunnel. I've not watered them since the 19th of December. So what's that, 3 weeks now? And we're not going to water them for a while yet. You know, they just don't need any this time of year. So always be aware of when your plants do and don't need water, and learn as much as you can about it. And yeah, I would avoid any irrigation system. I think they can be more trouble than they're worth, especially, you know, if you had a whole acre or more, then it's worth looking at.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think Grace is muted herself. We've got, I think, coming up only a couple more questions. One from Serafina.
Hiya.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Brilliant. Hi. So my friend and I, we have rented a little plot of land from a charity here, and we're very low on resources. So we've been cardboarding, but we haven't got compost, and we're reluctant to spend too much money on it. And of course, now I see we're going to continually get weeds growing back if we don't do it all. On the basis that we don't have much by way of resources, are we just better off annexing off a small bit that we can manage now and then going on to the rest once that's bedded in?
Yeah, that's a good point. I would invest in, or not invest in, you probably get it for free, a big sheet of black polythene, which you should be able to find from any farmer discarding it from a heap of silage as they feed their cows. And you could put that over all the ground that you're not able to make beds on at the moment, and it will serve to deprive weeds of light, and the weeds will then be very weak, if they're at all, even by the time you get to make beds there. Another thing you can do is apply to me, or to my PA to be precise, for a grant, because we are now offering bursaries. It's through membership of my channel. You can pay it's £5 a month to be a member, and we've got members now all over the world who are really happy to support this, and we're building up a bit of a treasure chest of money. People can apply, and you could get a grant to buy some more compost. Send an email to admin@charlesdowding.co.uk. That should get to there, and she'll get back in touch with you.
You'll be hearing from me very soon.
Wonderful, thank you. And we've got a question from Helen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, can't see you.
You can't see me?
You're in the dark, Helen.
Oh, that's probably an advantage.
There we are.
Right, I've got a question. It's only through people talking about insect repellents, about neem oil, Charles. I don't know if you've ever used it at all. I find it's absolutely amazing. As long as you obviously, you spray it quite a while before you want to eat the produce, because it is actually quite oily. And then obviously wash the produce.
Okay, yeah, I've never used it. I mean, those are two quite big reservations, I'd say, really, because, and it's quite expensive from what I hear. Is that right?
Well, you only need a teaspoonful with just a dash of soap liquid and a litre of warm water. So you can use it as a preventative or as a solution. But I have found, I mean, the myth is that it confuses the aphids to imagine that they're not hungry. How cool is that? But it works.
Okay, yeah, I stick with the BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, as the only spray I'm using, and that is very targeting towards caterpillars only. It doesn't kill any other insects. You know, I'm nervous of neem from what I've read about it, because it kills a lot of insects, and it will be killing some of your beneficial ones as well. I'd like to know what it does to ladybirds. I hope it's not hurting them. But BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, does not kill anything except caterpillars, and also it degrades very quickly. It doesn't harm mammals, so we can eat leaves, you know, straight after spray. But more than anything, I think if we're not careful, anything like, you know, I remember a lot of such discussions back in the 80s when I started growing, in the 70s, and people used to talk about things like nicotine as well. In the organic world, they were looking for organic replacements for the chemicals they were no longer allowed to use. With the fertilizers, they were looking for organic replacements for fertilizer, you know, feeds and all this kind of thing. You know, it's the wrong mindset. We need to be thinking more in terms of not having these pests in the first place and having healthy soil, which enables that. And I know that can sound fanciful. I feel I've done enough here to prove it can actually happen, and that's really what as much as I can say. I'm not saying you're wrong to use neem oil, but I'd urge you to think in terms of moving away from using it in the longer term, and it's only should ever be a stopgap. And I've definitely noticed with how I say aphids target weak plants. You know, Albert Howard said this in the 1940s. Pests are bringing us a message. You know, you got a pest. Why? You should ask the question and learn from it and find out why it's there, and hopefully they're not, you know, set things up differently so it doesn't come back. Growing plants out of season is another one. You know, that can massively invite pests because those plants shouldn't be there. So that links back to the sowing timeline, and sowing plants always very much in season and strongest, healthiest growth.
Okay, thank you.
Well, right.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Helen. And we've got a question from Jane.
Hi, and again, just to echo what was said earlier, it's been brilliant. Thank you very much. It's been really helpful. Two very quick questions. The Copper Tool website, what was the name of that, please?
Implementations.co.uk.
Thank you. Implementations.co.uk. And fleeces. Now, I've got a couple of fleeces, and I've used them in the spring. But last year, like yourself, that late frost really caught us. And what sort of weight or thickness of fleece do you tend to use?
Well, probably simplest to say the one to avoid is the one commonly sold in garden centres. It really bugs me. It's 1717 grams per square metre GSM. And the one you want is at least 25, maybe 30 GSM. And that, in old money, that's about an ounce per square yard. So yeah, be sure you got that. Otherwise, it will fall apart with less than one use.
Thank you. That's lovely.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Right.
Thank you. And we'll just take two more questions now, I think, Sally and Julian. So Sally first.
Oh yeah, hi. Thanks very much, Charles, for a great, interesting talk. Yeah, it's just I noticed from your plots that you don't there's no trees around or any shade around. I have got a big my neighbour's got a big Leylandii hedge right near my So I'm just doing my garden. So I'm just wondering, is it best to sort of plant beds away from trees that are going to take out moisture?
Is it? Well, I don't know if it's your hedge or what. When I arrived here, there was a huge conifer hedge of 40-year-old, 50-year-old spruce trees. It was 40 feet high, and as soon as I saw it, I knew that's got to come down. Luckily, they were on my boundary, so I had it cut down. And on the day before that was going to happen, a very stern-looking woman walked up my drive and introduced herself as my new neighbour. And she said, I hear you're going to have those trees cut down. And I said, yeah, tomorrow. And she said, well, I thought I'd let you know you're going to make a lot of people very happy. Oh, great. It's like, you know, that's sums up my feeling a bit. You know, conifers, particularly you mentioned Leylandii, if they were, I don't know, lime trees or something, that'd be more difficult. But if you want to grow a serious amount of food, you can't do it very too close to very too tall trees. If it's a hedge, you could prune it much shorter, and then you will have less competition from roots because they're transpiring, evaporating less. It's mainly moisture in the summer. But in your case, either cut or prune your hedge, and if you can't do that, you've just got to grow further away. I'm afraid there's no ways around that, and it's one of the things I like here that I suffer from it in the spring. I get a lot of wind, but there's fantastic light levels, and more than anything, there's no roots invading my beds. It's something for everyone to consider. It's why allotment sites are good, actually, because allotments tend not to have trees. They're open fields.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you. And last question, Julian.
Hello, Charles. Thank you very much for the talk, which was really great. So I've got two kind of related questions. One is about when you actually put the compost down. Do you have a particular time of the year that you lay it all in one go, or do you just put it down when it's convenient? And the other thing is about leaving either the soil or the compost bare over winter. There's you get a lot of these strong statements about never leave soil bare over winter, or if you put your compost down and leave it bare over winter, it won't have any goodness left in it by the time you put your plants in and things like that. So what's your view on those issues?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, remind me, what was your first question? So I got engrossed in that second one. Oh, God, he's muted. Okay, right. I'm gonna launch on.
I'm gonna ask mute again, Julian.
So did you not hear that?
Only the first one. Shall I let me start?
So the first question was when do you apply it, and the second one was about leaving it uncovered in winter.
They're interlinked. Well, I did say in my talk, we're putting on compost as and when beds come empty through late autumn. Basically, I'm cropping vegetables right the way through the season, the growing season, because I want to have all my beds full of vegetables. That's one reason I don't grow green manures or cover crops, as they're called. I want to grow vegetables. I don't want to grow a cover crop. And I'm feeding my soil with compost. So we're putting that on the beds as we come towards the end of the season. So the month of application is, or the 2 months mainly, is very end of October, but mostly November, going through up until Christmas. And normally by Christmas, we've got 90% of the beds composted, and the ones that are not composted are growing things like spinach over winter, where there's no room to get compost between. Occasionally, like I planted a bed of salad on the 29th of October this year, and we put the compost on before planting that bed of salad. And that's for the year ahead. Once a year application, sometime in late autumn preferably, but not exclusively. In the polytunnels, for example, we put the compost on in May because that's the most convenient time between the salads finishing from the winter and the summer plants going in. So it's not like a golden rule, but it's more about seizing moments when soil is available. And your second question is very interesting because there's a lot of rubbish talked about that. A lot of statements about nutrients leaching out of compost should themselves go on the compost heap. Compost does not leach nutrients. If it did, this system that I've been explaining to you and that you've seen the evidence of would not be working. As I said in the case of my carrots and Brussels sprout bed, that compost goes on before Christmas. The bed sits there bare, but it's not bare. That's a misuse of that word bare by people. They call the soil bare, but it's mulched with compost. It doesn't have anything growing in it briefly during the winter when things tend not to grow anywhere, so it's not exactly like missing out on anything. Then I'm sowing carrots at the spring equinox, and I'm not feeding any more anything, and I'm not only growing a lovely crop of carrots, but I'm growing a huge crop of Brussels sprouts, which in the language of people who think in terms of nutrients are heavy feeders, although I'm not recommending you think like that. But basically, that to me shows more than anything that compost does not leach nutrients. There's a whole network of biology in soil, and this links back to the value of no dig and why a lot of trials that have been done on these kinds of things are not valid for no dig. A lot of people who make scientific assumptions who make scientific statements make them with assumptions. Scientists, in my experience, are not good at analyzing their unspoken or hidden assumptions. And one of the facets of a lot of work done on leaching from soils, there is an unspoken assumption that soil has been tilled, because that's what most people do or have done until very recently. So that's like your clear and obvious starting point for the scientists. They don't know any better. They don't understand farming. They're just looking at what's in front of them and measuring and analyzing. You know, that's what modern scientists do. They're too focused on just the job in hand. They're not looking at the bigger picture, a lot of them, not all. So science has come up with this statement, or a lot of evidence out there that nutrients wash out of soil over winter, and in compost applied. For one thing, is it really compost? A lot of the leaching effect happens from raw cow slurry. That's where this ridiculous legislation came in of how much tons of compost you can put on a year. It's from farmers, bad farming, putting on fresh slurry near to watercourses and nitrates leaching out. And politicians who don't know any better than just blanket legislation, right, no more compost near the watercourses. No, they completely missed the point there. And the other one is with soil that's tilled or not tilled. No till, no dig, you have a strong biological network which holds onto nutrients, and more needs to be known about this. There was a study done in California by a guy called Willie, I think, and there's a link to it on my website. If you look at the links page and scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a couple of studies there. One's from Rothamsted actually as well. They've recently come out saying things along these lines, advocating no-till. Rothamsted advocating no-till, saying the benefits. The world is changing under our feet, thank goodness. But I would urge any of you listening, and I've touched upon this a lot, to be very careful of what are presented as scientific studies or statements like the ones you've just quoted, which on the face of it sound kind of correct. Yeah, nutrients leach out. That makes common sense. We know that. But no, that's fertilizer. That's tilled soil where the biology has been broken. So always question things, question statements like that. Don't make assumptions yourselves, and go forwards with that understanding. I'm going to have to finish now. I mean, I'll say a proper goodbye in a minute, but I've probably said enough on that. You can see that I feel pretty strongly about this, because it concerns me that so many people are being misled and so many false statements are going unquestioned. So I'm really glad you asked that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question, Julian. And thank you, Charles. Thank you for a wonderful talk and for giving us so much of your extra time for questions, which have been a really valuable part of it. And thank you to everybody who's come and participated today. It's been wonderful to see so many people keen and enthusiastic and here to be inspired about growing our own food. Really wonderful.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'll say cheerio. Very nice to see you all.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.